It's all about hygiene. Really important, I suppose, is we're very good at bedding ewes close to lambing, just around lambing time. But it's also having the ewes clean in the run up to lambing, So there's no point in having everything really clean and the ewes are totally soiled because they were in dirty conditions in the run up to lambing.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode, we're bringing us insights, advice, and technical updates for the sheep industry. With current challenging weather conditions creating significant problems on farms, this episode focuses on some practical management strategies to support crop performance. We're joined by Michael Gottstein, Head of Sheep Knowledge Transfer in Teagasc, to discuss key actions farmers can take in this difficult weather. The conversation covers a range of important topics, including maintaining hygiene, managing group pens effectively, and selecting and handling young lambs at turnout. Michael also shares advice on supplementing ewes outdoors and highlights some of the common health risks to watch out for during this prolonged wet and cold period. Hopefully the episode offers some timely practical guidance to help safeguard lamb performance and reduce losses during this challenging period.
Been a kind of a difficult spring and we've had rain every day. I think they were saying down in Valentia Island since the new year. So, I mean, it's been very wet. Ground conditions are very wet. And I suppose for people who have lambed, I suppose it's grass is probably disappearing fast. We've had challenges in terms of getting fertiliser out. Probably most farmers have no fertiliser out. Or slurry out, slurry tanks are filling on cattle farms. So yeah, challenging year so far, and I suppose challenging now for people who are lambing at the moment or just about to start lambing. Yeah.
Look, we'll kind of break this down a little bit into some of the kind of practical things to need to focus on. Not always going to be ideal, Michael, but some of the things we can kind of do. We might take it step by step. In terms of housing, whether you're lambing at the moment or just preparing the lamb, look, it's been difficult keeping pens dry, pens bedded. Hygiene, Michael, and the importance of straw this time.
So look, I suppose it's all about hygiene, really. And if you think back to, we'll say the bad years, 23, 24, last year was a good year, very low levels of joint eel and watery mouth on farms last year. Look, there's always exceptional farms, but I mean, by and large, huge problems the year before. That's built up, weather related, having to keep animals in longer. So really straw is, I know straw is expensive. But lambs are valuable, I suppose, and we would have seen lots of lambs not making it in the bad years. So I'd be advocating that people would spend a bit of money on the straw. If you save a couple of lambs, they'll pay for an awful lot of straw. Really important, I suppose, is we're very good at bedding ewes close to lambing, just around lambing time. But it's also having the ewes clean in the run up to lambing. So there's no point in having everything really clean. And the ewes are totally soiled because they were in dirty conditions in the run up to lambing. So important if you have ewes on straw bedding that they're bedded regularly and kept clean. And again, using lime and things like that around feeders and water trucks, stopping drips in water trucks and things like that kind of wet the bedding, fixing eave chutes that are leaking into the shed, all that type of thing. And then I suppose if we have ewes on slats, either sweeping or cleaning them slats to prevent the build-up of kind of dragged in forage mixing with feces and blocking up the slats and basically the ewes being dirty. So I think that's an important kind of message for people, maybe in the run-up to lambing. Don't just think about it at lambing time, think of it in the run-up as well.
I think it's important, and even in them group pens, Michael, the addition of maybe even a wee bit of lime in them group pens just to help it dry up in particularly difficult conditions in sheds at the moment. They're quite humid.
Yeah, look, lime is very cheap and cheerful, and bag of lime goes a long way, and it dries, it disinfects. Yeah, it's a great all-round thing, and there should be no shortage of lime used prior to bedding, basically, yeah.
Look, for those that are lambing at the moment, I'm sure the individual lambing pens are getting full up very quickly, very little opportunity to turn out. Setting up group pens, Michael, early on, and maybe even temporary group pens at the moment is something that really needs to be considered.
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, it's really important that people have enough lambing pens. So, and again, I know very often we're tight for pens, so maybe buying a few extra gates. And, I know, again, there's a cost associated with that, but lambs are valuable and you want to try and keep them all alive. So having enough lambing pens for the ewes so that they can get at least 24 hours in an individual pen with their lambs to mother up. And then look at if the weather is fine, and hopefully by having this call, Kieran, we'll jinx it and it'll all become really good and fine once this goes out. But in the case that doesn't happen and people can't get ewes out with young lambs because of adverse weather and things like that, then I suppose it's important to have a plan B. And the plan plan B is really having a group pen. So that's an area where you can put kind of 5 to 10 ewes with their lambs into a small pen, a loose pen, and keep an eye on them, leave them harden up, leave them get used to each other before you turn them out. Give them a couple of extra days inside, with the rain off their backs before they're turned out. Like, and look at that can be anything from, I suppose, having an area in the sheep house to basically maybe chucking machinery out of a machinery shed or a workshop and
Setting it up now.
you setting it up there.
Look, when you are talking about that, Michael, maybe to avoid some of the obstacles that can cause issues, raised trucks, that like that, anything that could fall on lambs or crush lambs or hurt lambs is important too, because look, other supplies will become tight during this period as well.
Yeah, look at especially in those group pens, not to have any protruding holes or pens or bits sticking out that a yoke can belt another lamb off of, or while they're getting used to finding that the young lambs are getting used to that over there won't be as friendly as the mom will be. So just be careful in, I suppose, in terms of how those pens are set up. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Look, in terms of turning out, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to start moving ones out. Any tips around picking the most suitable ones to go out, or how to manage that to try and minimise any losses or otherwise?
Yeah. So look at it. I think at some stage, obviously, sheep have to go out, and if the weather is good, fine, you just do it as normal. If the weather is bad at turnout, then I suppose there's a couple of things maybe to keep in mind. First of all, I'd always say turn out the ewes with their lambs in the morning, early in the morning. That basically allows them kind of the daylight hours to get used to the field and finding each other and all that type, seeking out shelter, and all that type of thing. And also it gives you an opportunity as well to walk around the field in the evening before sunset, to check that if there's any lamb or ewe in trouble and bring them back in. But I suppose if we have bad weather coming and we have to turn out sheep, because just the sheds are too full, then I suppose the couple of options that are there. So maybe turn out ewes with single lambs, because those ewes have more milk. They'd be bigger lambs, as the ewe only has one lamb to mind. In flocks with multiple breeds, avoid turning out lambs with little wool. So sometimes we can see like Charlies, Vendées, Rouges, these type of French breeds with very little wool. Some of the lambs are almost like little piglets. So those kind of lambs are very, very exposed in adverse weather. We can get these disposable lamb jackets, little plastic lamb jackets. They're cheap and cheerful, really. Put them on the lambs. They generally only last for a day or two, right? They generally burst out of them quite quick. But they do provide a bit of protection for the lambs, in particular during adverse weather, wind and rain. Like, so I would say if we have to turn out lambs in less than ideal conditions, probably be worth a couple of quid on them just to stick them on the lambs. Now, look, you're going to have to go around and pick them up afterwards. Generally, they kind of gather along the fence line. But I mean, it will save a couple of lambs, definitely. Turn them out in small groups, kind of 10 to 15 ewes in the best fields with the best shelter. And we need to have grass as well. So, look, no point in turning out ewes into fields with no grass. Waste of time. Keep them inside. Figure out some other way. Short grass increases mismothering. The ewes will be running around trying to find food. They won't be looking after the lambs. Bad weather comes, you'll have a lot of dead lambs in that situation. And look at, I suppose, the other thing is to avoid turning out ewes that have poor milk. So if you ewe there with two lambs and one of them is clearly struggling, waste of time putting her out with that lamb. That lamb is not going to come back in at weaning time. Or ewes that are in poor body condition. So thin ewes, they can't milk off their back. And during periods of adverse weather, ewes will need to milk off their back. So if you've got thin ewes going out and there's adverse weather coming, those ewes will have very little milk during the adverse weather periods because they'll be hunched under a ditch. They won't be eating. They'll have no milk and the lambs will fall off them. So again, look at they're the last to let out, you hold on to them as long as you possibly can. And look at the last thing here and just on this is to learn how to give the intraperitoneal glucose injection to lambs. And I think that's an important thing for people to learn to do. during periods of adverse weather. If you're going out in the morning time and you find these lambs that are clearly hypothermic, can't stand, can't lift their head up, still with us, but on the way out, they need a glucose injection into the belly. It's very easy to do, but you need to be set up for it. And there's lots of YouTube videos or clips there online to have a look at it. You've nothing to lose. Lamb is going to die if you don't give that injection. So I'd be saying just to be set up for that. Hopefully, we won't need it, but if we do need it, at least we have the equipment and the knowledge.
And so look, something we covered with you on the podcast before, indeed on the recent webinar. Look, I would just put you back on that one with the tin yos. I think it's something we've seen in a lot of difficult years. That's where we tend to see that higher mortality. Michael, there will come a point where they have to go out anyway, but there's times maybe where the more sensible option, instead of letting them out with two, is to actually take one off, artificially rear it, and the more than likely going to be fine to rear the single. But you're going to save that lamb and give the second lamb a better chance of survival as well. So it's probably one of them practical things. There's a reluctance probably to do it, but it's probably one of the practical things that can help us.
Yeah, so our experience from 23 and 24 would be that flocks that had significant numbers of tin yos lost an awful lot of lambs during those adverse weather periods, and they would have been better off to take those lambs off them and keep them inside, or keep those yos inside until the adverse weather had solved itself. Possibly, even treat them like yos that are rearing triplets with a lot of meal at grass. Again, look at probably not practical, but certainly look at, if you can at all, I'd say avoid letting out those tin yos during adverse periods of weather, especially if they have twin lambs, if they have two lambs at foot.
Look, one other thing you touched on there, grass on some farms will be tight. Fertiliser hasn't gone out in the vast majority of the country. Where supplies are starting to get tight, Michael, and maybe even in cases where they're not, with current conditions, utilisation's poor. Talk to me a little bit about supplementing outside, the need for it, and how we should go about doing it.
Generally, when we're talking about having adequate grass, we're talking about 5 or 6 centimeters is kind of where we want to be at. So if you have kind of 5 or 6 centimeters of good grass for the yos, they'll get their fill, and look at, provided we don't get terribly wet weather, and yos are in poor body condition, they'll manage. I suppose after that, then if we start running out of grass, or we don't have that grass because ground wasn't closed up in time in the autumn time or whatever, fertilizer hasn't gone out on most farms at this stage. I suppose the important thing is to have the fertilizer in the yard now at this stage and get it out as soon as you can. Once the weather starts drying up, get it out in the drier ground first. Don't wait for all the ground to dry up. Get out as quick as you can with the fertilizer. But the ground has to be trafficable. I suppose then if we're short of feed, grass in the field, and I suppose it's about feeding meal to the yos to top them up, to maintain that level of animal performance. It's important really that we don't negatively impact your intake in the first 5 weeks, because that's when they're heading for their peak milk yield. And if you restrict them at that stage, you reduce the peak milk yield and you reduce the overall lactation amount of milk produced, and obviously then your lamb performance suffers, right? So look at, I suppose we would be saying, depending on how much grass is there and how short the grass is, but it's probably somewhere between a half a kilo for kind of mild situations where there is still significant grass but we're trying to slow it down, to anything up to possibly a kilo and a half for yos with rearing twins where there's virtually no grass, kind of like beast from the east type scenarios like from years ago, and obviously probably going in with some forage at that stage as well, so it's somewhere between those levels. Generally we would kind of say, look at yos in poor body condition need to get about a half a kilo more than yos that are in good body condition. So, that depends on how yos are turned out. But if people are turning out, we'll say the best body condition yos first and keeping the lesser body condition yos for a later turnout batch, then, that makes sense in terms of that if you do have to supplement them, you can give the thinner yos a little bit extra meal. So if we're, say, feeding the twins with good body condition half a kilo, the twins in poor body condition need to be getting a kilo a day until grass reserves get back up to a kind of a level where they can manage by themselves. So generally what we would say in good grazing condition, dry weather, yos, if they have 4 centimeters or more of grass, they'll get their daily fill. If it's less than 4 centimeters, and that's the level at which you can see the sheep dung when you look across the field, when you're standing, you can see the little deposits away from you. Then obviously the ewes are not getting their fill, and at that stage we need to start supplementing. If if the grazing conditions are really wet, so the type of weather we're getting at the moment where we have wet conditions, then intake is reduced by about 20%. Okay, so look at ewes in good body condition on good grass are probably just about getting away. Ewes in poor body condition will need supplementation during very, very wet weather. And then I suppose ewes that are short of grass need extra supplementation.
Challenging too, Michael, feeding it out at the moment. I suppose every effort to try and keep it in the clean area as possible.
Yeah, look, I think you need to move it around a bit, and maybe even some people might be feeding cobs. If you're feeding loose, probably cobs. Nuts really need a truck, especially in wet weather. If you're feeding nuts loose on the ground, I know it's convenient through snackers or driving along with the quad and putting a hole in the bag, but you're probably going to lose 20 or 30% of it through trampling it in. So, I mean, look, there's all those challenges. There's no easy, silver bullet here for making life easy
No,
for people, I think,
definitely not.
Kieran, at this stage. Yeah.
Look, one other thing, and again, it probably affects those lambs slightly earlier, but it's probably another prevention we need to have in place. Tetany, Michael, is a potential risk. You mentioned about intake being reduced at difficult conditions. Having preventive measures in place early.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I suppose magnesium isn't stored in the body for any major length of time, so it needs to be given daily. Generally, you always need around 2 grams, 1 to 2 grams of magnesium per day. That's pure magnesium in elementary form, I suppose. That equates to generally, I suppose, somewhere around 4 grams of CalMag, which is what most people will be feeding, either in a bucket or in a ration. And during periods of adverse weather, the magnesium uptake is halved, just due to stress and all of that type of thing. So generally, the recommendation for using that during periods of adverse weather is to get about 4 grams of magnesium or 8 grams of CalMag into them. So how do we do that? There are numerous ways. There are boluses, which generally give maybe somewhere between a half and a gram of magnesium a day. So they're a help, but they don't really generally give enough for protection, full protection on its own, I suppose. There are magnesium buckets, so high mag buckets. So they come generally somewhere between kind of 8% and 15% magnesium. They always leak them. So look at having plenty of them scattered around the field is probably the easiest way of getting it into them. Now there are some farms, like for example our farm in Athenry, our research farm in Athenry, where during adverse weather, even the buckets alone won't do, and we'd have a few ewes going down with grass tetany if we don't treat them. If we're just depending on the buckets alone, I suppose. And in that situation, I mean, one of the tools adopted by the farm staff in Athenry is that when there is an adverse weather event coming, they feed the ewes a half a kilogram of concentrates containing CalMag for a day or two before the adverse weather and during the adverse weather, just to get them over the hump. So that's a potentially useful option for people, I suppose, if you're on one of these high risk farms, exposed, light soils, high fertility, a lot of reseeded pasture, high risk from a grass tetany point of view, and you're worried that the mineral buckets or the boluses or the boluses and mineral buckets or whatever system you're using isn't going to get you over the hump. Then by going in and supplementing just for that extreme weather period for a day or two before it and during that weather event will probably get most people out of the woods in terms of preventing ewes from going down with grass tetany. Just one thing to mention, I suppose, is water supplementation. So magnesium in the water, like a lot of people do for cattle, that does not work for sheep because sheep drink very little water when they go out. Ewes with lambs, and during wet weather they'll drink absolutely no water. So medicating the water for sheep is not a reliable way of getting magnesium into them, and people shouldn't even bother trying that. It's just not going to be a reliable way to prevent disease.
Certainly won't be drinking in this weather. Look at Michael, it's a wee bit of a case of fingers crossed as well. Days are getting longer. Hopefully this weather will turn a wee bit, but keeping your eye on it, keeping focused and just doing the basics is all we can do at the moment.
Absolutely. And look at, Kieran, as I said at the start, the last number of adverse years when we wrote an article or a technical note and put it in a paper, the weather changed. We jinxed it the right way. So hopefully when this podcast goes out, that it'll jinx it too, and we'll be back to sunshine and weather and fertilizer going out and slurry going out and lambs skipping around the field. Hopefully that's the way it'll happen. But if it doesn't, I suppose there are options there for people to try and mitigate the effects, I suppose, and that's what we're about.
Very good. Michael, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for your time.
No bother.
Okay, we'll leave it there for this week's episode. I think some very useful practical tips from Michael for managing at the moment. Look, hopefully we will see a change in the weather and things get a little bit easier on farms. That's it for me. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us to get more episodes.